Welcome. This is my old teacher. He's actually, when I say old teacher, he's the same age as I am. So he's not that old. But
I skipped a grade.
He was my teacher back in the 80s when I had just left the world of music to enter the world of poetry. So Don was incredibly important to me personally, to my sense of what poetry can be. I wrote this little introduction that I'm going to read, and I'm going to turn it over to Don. I decided not to emphasize all the accomplishments that I hope you already know about because you're here and you received the publicity in advance. But just know that he's a very important poet with a lot of books out there. Many are on sale on the book there, on the book table there. So this is what I wrote. The great theologian Paul Tillich once wrote, "Heal the sick means help them regain their lost unity without depriving them of their abundance." When I think of that, I think of our guest tonight, Donald Revell, not only because of the role he played as mentor in my life, opening up my experience of language and its growth in speculative, imaginative life, but also because of his larger influence on the poetics of our time. I can think of no other poet who figures as a more credible and ardent defender of abundance as manifest in a wilderness of spirit and context, an otherness in and beyond us that calls upon our capacity to heal. All good poems are love poems. They have something to give, something to lose. In a world that threatens to discredit and consume the wild, Don Revell's poems honor it by enlarging both its claim and, in acts of imaginative attention, its incarnation. As he says in his poem Privacy, "Why have I chosen privacy over fullness? Why have I chosen the straight, unmutual loving of a small man whose heart is secrecy and whose citizenship only that of the reformed transient in waste places he fills from himself alone? These are the faces beside the sleeping lion, innocence, the destroyer of wildness, the victim of an idea that says virtue is denial, betrayal of the too full fullness of the world. Too full, that is, for the structures that pass for good or true. Too abundant for the sanitizing sensibility whose language is hollow and directive, whose morality is cruel. In confession, then, lies a summons, an interrogation of failed engagements, betrayals that, laid bare, suggest a more generous life of dialogue and exchange, ever turning towards some frontier of which we are a part, the unsaid, if not the unsayable, a more ample mutuality of relations, and the cry of the marvel, whereby we come to care. Without further delay, Donald Revell.
Thank you, Bruce. We'll begin at the beginning. Death. Death calls my dog by the wrong name. A little man when I was small, death grew beside me. Always taller, but always confused, as I have almost never been. Confusion, like the heart, gets left behind early by a boy, abandoned the very moment futurity with her bare arms comes a waltzing down the fire escapes to take his hand. Death, I said, if your eyes were green, I would eat them. For what are days but the furnace of an eye? If I could strip a sunflower bare to its bare soul, I would rebuild it. Green inside of green, ringed round by green. There'd be nothing but new flowers anymore. Absolute Christmas. Death, I said. I know someone, a woman, who sank her teeth into the moon. For what are space and time but the inventions of sorrowing men? The soul goes faster than light. Eating the moon alive, it leaves space and time behind. The soul is forgiveness because it knows forgiveness. And the knowledge is whirligig. Whirligig taught me to live outwardly. Shoe shop, pizza parlor, surgical appliances. All left behind me with the hooey. My soul is my home, an old star, hounded by old starlight. Death, I ask you, whose only story is the end of the story right from the start, how is it I remember everything that never happened and almost nothing that did? Was I ever born? I think of the suicides, all of them thriving, many of them painting beautiful pictures. I think of boys and girls murdered in their first beauty, now with children of their own. And I have a church in my mind set cruelly ablaze, and then the explosion of happy souls into the greeny, frozen Christmas Eve air. Another good Christmas, a white choir. Beside each other still, my death and I are a magical hermit. Dear mother, I miss you. Dear reader, your eyes are now green, green as they used to be before I was born. I don't know if when you were a child you used to play a game with flour called a buttercup, where you would hold it under someone's chin, and if it made a little yellow circle, they loved you, or you loved them, etc., etc. This sort of comes from that, and also from something my youngest daughter said. On my last of a series of incredibly unfortunate visits to the AWP conference, I was in an elevator with my youngest daughter, and a couple of people got on who sort of knew me, sort of knew my work, and they were feeling inquisitive and asked me a question about Jesus. And my daughter said, "Jesus is my daddy's girlfriend," which got rid of them and has spared me the unpleasantness of ever going to AWP again. So this sort of comes from my daughter Lucy. Once, Christ, like a girl, held a buttercup under my chin. Love fails. A flower cuts my throat, and angels weep from the wound, little angels. Love never fails. I met a woman in Kentucky. There's no going back. If I am in a woodland, she is the woodland, the warm, soft hand extended on the leaves. A rill, a creek, a brook, whatever it is, we've come to it in the catastrophe of little angels. Leaves fall. They catch fire, beautiful fire, and never reach the ground. Love fails and never fails. Christ couldn't bear it, but we must. We must walk on water and through a woodland too. The actual past weeps from future wounds. We have children, and the children live on air. This poem is an answer to a question someone once asked me about creative writing, and I just simply said that I'm against it. So this poem is called Against Creation. Sovereign of my heart, your temple is deep in the dead branches, moving only when the wind delves so far. Eden is a go. I mean, all's terror now. Sovereign of my heart, I am shouting at nightfall. Bats above me, hummingbirds skittish below the bats, almost like dragonflies. I am shouting into debris, immodest happiness in Eden's humility. Ago, Adam's fall invented the future. He tied the bat's wings onto dragonflies. Nature, even as it dies, abhors imagination. What men call extinction, I call home. There's this wonderful, I live in the desert, about 20 miles outside of Las Vegas. And there's a moment every night, just as it's about to get dark, when the dragonflies are replaced by bats. So the dragonflies begin to disappear from the yard, and the bats begin to appear. And there's this wonderful moment when you really can't tell the difference between a bat and a dragonfly. It's in the gathering darkness. It's kind of magical. We were talking at dinner about whether it was possible to write a long poem. You're about to find out. Don't worry, this is not like the Odyssey or anything lugubrious, but it's more than a sonnet, more than several. But I like it a lot. It's called Long-Legged Bird. I also like birds. Long-Legged Bird. I have a sweet house, halfway to the top of fires no one knows. A moth knows. Fire is a door, a sudden portal. He flies in, and what remains behind to burn is not moth, merely discernment. Ophelia said as much to Hamlet, who never knew. Death is an element like water and like fire, and there are many of them, all doors. Drowning, we are done with wisdom, which is carried out to sea. Burning, we leave old minds gone up in smoke. In a sweet house halfway to extinction, the air, let me try to explain. The air is made of souls of women and men, all dancing. There's nothing to see. Acumen and discernment, as much as wisdom and wax wings, are no help. You must breathe the dead to feel the dancing. Despair is the baseline, earth and straw. Everything else, when you breathe it, is ecstasy. I want to explain. Tremolos and squealings, and then a high sound sweeten the little halfway house forever. I mean, it just goes on forever, as through the little portals children pour. I keep a fiddle in my bones. At night, sometimes the vibration of deep strings becomes a trembling. I wake up frightened at first, seeing the shiny cadres of my dreams dispersed into dark corners and thin air. Then, gradually, fear subsides. I am only the music that I am, and always it leaves me. Ordinary ecstasy, awaking from silly dooms of inwardness. Watch a butterfly alighted on an iris. When it flies away, it bursts the flower, projecting its colors and infant textures upward and out until the horizon itself is one pure flower flying home. Loving the fire, moth feels nothing to forgive. Lifted out of the water by 1,000 strengths of flowers, Ophelia lives. Forgiveness is a watercourse and conflagration all around the world, a great adventure. When I walk on ground, I walk on my bones, making music, or rather, feeling the music make me. Out of thin air, into pure air, horizon calls me. I am attending to 10 accidents. I am searching through the colors. I am going home to Colorado with bombs. I am bringing a plum tree and a cherry tree for a new town, and when the avalanche has come and gone, I will put them in the ground. I expect there to be dancing. I expect there to be forgiveness on the epic scale. I have wasted the effort of all flowers because I expect there to be forgiveness on the epic scale. I keep a little man inside my bones. His fiddling makes my Chinese daughter smile. When did our sweet Jesus become the purview and bad pretext of jailers? How did loving kindness come to devastate the world with wars? Overhead, a long-legged bird circles my sweet house. I feel he is waiting for me to join him, to find real wings and rise out of my own mind into his air. What would I find there? Portals and invisible heavy traffic. My mother as a baby. My father, a cowboy. My sister, finally, after so much heartbreak, a girl. The body travels inside the soul. The body's a passenger. This has nothing to do with Jesus, though he is right here beside me. He's unhurt. Overhead, the long-legged bird departs at last. I'm staying. My soul was kind enough to put me here, halfway to extinction with good wine and a fine little house, so here I stay. Bones of mine, play no mournful melodies. There is no harm in all the world, little man. There is only happiness on a lofty slope where it still snows. I am breathing with my dead. I feel them dancing. I was a peculiar little boy. I loved playing with my army men, but I never wanted them to come to any harm. So I would set them up on the floor, play classical music on the stereo, and weep. And that was it. You know, my father used to say, "Are they going to fight?" And I said, "Oh, no, they get hurt. They're too beautiful to fight." He says, "But I grew up in a 3-room apartment, so having one of the rooms taken up by my army men was a sacrifice for my parents." And I would sometimes put my head on the floor, so I was at eye level with my little army. And then the weeping was uncontrollable. It was just the whole reality of mortality, that such beautiful young men could risk their lives. Just breathtaking. My wife thought I had put all this behind me, and she made the mistake of going into my study the other day and opened the drawer she's not supposed to open. Army man. She said, "Is this what you're going to do when you retire? Play with army men?" Anyway, one of the records I used to like to play when I was weeping over my soldiers was a record of Borodin's Polyphesian dances. So this is about Borodin, which you don't need to know anything about. You just have to remember the peculiar little boy. When the world was loveliness, I was a composer. Borodin, my left eye level with the floor beside toy men. Wild work and havoc they made, being glad. I could draw a line, would run straight through the minds of men, being a sociable angel. Music before and after, blushing. Heaven is a nonsense entirely sensible. I was a child on the floor beside you, making music, becoming small in the rosy embrace of God's best messenger. I loved your havoc and your hair. We were talking about music earlier at supper. hunting. A cloud, a rabbit, and a quail. These are the letters of Jesus' name. Ewer, dogs and a ewer. Vermeer angers your awful roommate, and still God's mercy reigns upon the past. Put it together. Donald, only you. Vermeer, dogs and a ewer. Either everything is music or nothing is. Either we live in the past or there are more birds than can be counted. Everything is music. See, I'm hoping to answer all your questions in advance, so that when I'm finished, there will be no questions left. Everything is music, in case you wanted to know what everything is. So we've explained Jesus, death, the afterlife, eternity, and music. Now, cutting an onion will take a little bit longer to teach you. But I'm not, well, I am tired, actually, but that's all right. As a fugitive from the teaching of creative writing, I spend more and more time teaching Shakespeare, who is safely dead these 403 years and is unlikely to cause much controversy, which is restful for people at my age. And I love, best of all, those late, strange plays that are sometimes called problem plays or romances, plays like Cymbeline, Pericles, The Winter's Tale, of course, The Tempest. And I love them because they all hinge on the same notion of forgiveness and reconciliation. And I am at a time of life when I only have an appetite for forgiveness. I need as much as I can get, and I want to find it wherever I can find it. And Shakespeare is a great provider. So this poem is called Pericles. If you know the play Pericles, well and good. If you don't, read it by all means. And this poem, you don't need it to understand this poem because it's not possible to understand this poem. But you can enjoy it. I enjoy lots of things. Don't you hate going to restaurants where someone tells you what's in the soup? We can take. Are you getting a little bit of cumin here? Get on it. I don't want to understand the soup. I want to eat it. Pericles. What are my friends? Mouths, not eyes for bitterest underflesh of the farewell. I was a man and suffered like a girl. I spoke underneath to where the lights are pretty, 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 whence they came to tell one God gets another. My friends are mouths for God, tearing me. In such a world, broken only daughter opens to splendor. My first thought was that dying is a deep well into the image of death, a many of one girl. Later it meant to smile with no face where mirrors are mouths. Cupid and Psyche wore blindfolds made of glass, which explains why girls get to heaven early mornings when Adam fell. Gods after gods we go. Still later, friends shouldered high mountains to the lee shore, gashed and the gash a fountain of waters. The landscape defames a single flower, amaranth. Magic hides an island world of boys and one daughter. I buried a pearl in God's eye. And yet he sees her, defames her, considers his time well spent imagining a continent of flowers whose final climate is a broken girl. Bells of a Cretan woman in labor hurled from a tower. Flesh realer than the ground, she somehow upwards curled into the bloom of her groin, where bells are bees. I am an old man with a new beard. I am the offspring of my child, sprung from hell. Shipwreck makes peninsula metaphor out of my hatred, her rape, and one bell tower. Confusion suicides the poems. Heaven, I heard, where the juice runs from stone-struck flowers. At the end of the world, I must use proper violence. Nothing is more true to tell. Tell the taut-strung higher calendars I've a margent in mind, and new words hope to say, catastrophe to hear, old Confederates and inwood apples where apples never shone. also tell of mountains shouldered underneath one flower called amaranth. They tired of the world who made the world this way. God never did, never will. If you were to call from the bottom of the ocean the words, every one to me a living daughter, would shout wild mercy as never was before. Now, there's a series of poems in this book for Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary. I like Jesus, and I like his mother too. And I rely upon her equally, sometimes even more than upon her son. This is one of those poems. Not the star, but homely grace and an accustomed tree guided the three of them, as if earth itself were a slender, tenacious grip upon coldest air. Soil grew upward into trees. Uncanny grace was a broken, white-necked swan who birthed alone, God alive, at the foot of a tree in the mess there. History consents to the miracle because it must, just as a sandstorm of atoms in Asia settles into the form of wings. Yet Asia has no wings, and not any altars underground. With God's help, we have oppressed them with our wealth. With God's help, they will now revenge themselves with numbers. I sing of Mary, climbed out of earth alive. And this is another from that sequence. What more should heaven be than white litter of desert willows on the long June grass? I'm not injured. My son is in peril, though I want for nothing. Birds in litter, birds. Heaven, a help to no one, helps me. Once more greensward, look me in the eye. Out of the setting moon, a keen wind seeks the sun's face. Find me a suicide, and in the face of such peril, I want for nothing. What more could heaven allow, or broken pencil of the Holy Ghost right now? Inward, my son. The women are birds there on real grass. Nakedness litters the air with rescue. Take it, wrap it round fat and lymph and bone. God sometimes knows his own. I grew up in the Bronx. It's a beautiful place, lovely place. Most of my childhood, every 4 years, presidential candidates would come to my neighborhood and point at it and say, this must never happen again. So I began to take it personally and feel that American politicians didn't have much to offer me. Middletown Road, which is in this poem, is just a road in the Bronx that the Bronx is filled with these little canals that nobody uses anymore. But when I was a boy, they did. And it was lovely to wave to the men who were driving the canal boats. God was no poet and then was. In the spring of '65, I walked inland along Middletown Road towards the trains speeding through the sky, and with canals turbid on each side, water traffic then, low barges painted yellow, and black men waving upwards to the bridge keepers. Sometimes churches, sometimes brittle-scented trees, red lanceolate, brittle leaves, and almost lilac, any girl at all the mother of God, Grail legend, outlandish tabloids. I say this, the spirit of tolerance requires no one to be stupid. No one at all. Sun and air, fire, air. The world is flawless. Of youth time itself, say Adirondack, Berkshire, Katahdin, enigmas guessed at instantly once upon a time. I am clinging to the torches of it all, white phalloi upheld, flowers walking unaided over rugged soil. Thoreau was neither childish nor childlike. he was a real boy. He guessed instantly arrowheads, panopticons to find a missing house and the poor hanged girl. Our youth is obscure only where it is rational. Louisa cut hair, atta boy, and sends Honduras packing. My God, my king, these pictures are free for the taking. With 2 young eyes, white flowers could walk all the way home under God, humanly. Eden's the living end. When the modern was a boy, wild for it, one size fit all. Here in America, we hang pictures on walls. This last poem is a little long, but it is the last. Do you know the story of Actaeon? And if you don't, would you mind if I tell it to you? It won't take but a minute. Actaeon was a hunter out with his dogs, and he had the magnificent misfortune to come upon the goddess Diana bathing, the way a lot of people take baths, naked. Myself not included. I have never taken my socks off once. You don't know where it's been. And Diana, of course, was a virgin goddess, the hunter, and you just weren't supposed to see her naked. And so she turned Actaeon into a deer, a stag, at which point his hunting dogs leaped upon him and killed him. Which is, I guess, a cautionary tale in a certain way. Never leave home. You might stumble upon a naked goddess, and then your dog will eat you. You see? Stay at home. You have cable. Anyway, that story is kind of essential to whatever in God's name is going on here. And it is going on here in God's name, so I'm happy with that. It's called the Glens of Kytheron. Kytheron is, depending on how you feel about it, it's either a mountain or a whole bunch of mountains in Greece. But almost everything you studied in Greek mythology happened up there. Okay? It's obviously a place of a lot of action. And this poem is making use of some of that. And again, thank you for coming out on what I'm told is a chilly night for Denton. So that your bravery is appreciated, and your attention is marveled at. So thank you. You're very kind. So this is this poem, The Glens of Kytheron. It has an epigram from Ted Hughes, the late poet laureate of Great Britain. Till the gold fields of stiff wheat cry, "We are ripe, reap us." I begin to think Actaeon never changed. The words that followed him, the poems that leapt upon him and left him for dead, were difficult, exactly to the extent they were rational. It makes perfect sense for nakedness to give way to frenzy. And the poems, let's be clear, were naked. Time was, questions were put, clear as water. The goddess bathed, and time was the soft smile of water catching the sunlight on her. And the sunlight, let's be clear, was sheer murder. Into the same creature, no human word leaps twice. Given to frenzy, nakedness smiles upon the breaking of men and dogs. How easy to lose all patience with chaste things. Lord, I am hoping to hear from you before the hunters and suicides make off with me. Lord, I am hoping to take your weapons to a tarn freezing in the death of me. I shall harry the moon there. I shall halloo. Bayed in the cross tree is a lion, too. In 1969, A red stag made a cobweb of moonlight in his antlers. For once in your life, pray without ceasing. Pray the stag safely past the lion's tree. Actaeon never changed. Predator is simply prey to nakedness and reason. The poems have been out hunting all the time. Then it's Friday. Frisk! You might as well. Seeing as the rape weed, you might as well. The lion is no stranger. The belling stag is as familiar as the moon, but a strange suicide. Taken by legs, taken by sinews, kissing the cobwebs of moonlight, he prays the prayer I was not quick to say. Berries and hoardings, ermine horseplay short of the new, short of poems no longer old as I knew them, leaving the small schools for the main campus, rapewood climbing pale. It is Friday, stars won't cross. Actaeon never imagined the frail, sheer speed of meat. Lord, eat me. Nothing else makes sense. On the far, safe side of becoming, metaphor is all love, the pure being of each nude above perfect sense. I begin to hunt words. The tension, the soft smile of the goddess eases a short while, reappears in a red stag's terror. Metaphor leaps and eats. It is not difficult. Love is meat. The dogs leap on Actaeon. He is human. I begin to think of time as anything in the gift of humans, or a sacrifice to the long uplift of lions in the blood. Now dogs tear deeply into the living flesh. Each moment is a visible agony. And still, the godly human nature remains unharmed. I never imagined the sheer frail of fear, so powerful. Legs and sinews turn into flowers. Between her breasts, the goddess shelters one such, one blood violet, alive. The porch of heaven is littered with color. As familiar as the moon, our humanness crosses into heaven as the new poem. On the far side of becoming, a life's work begins another kind of work, but naked of change. There are animals, water, and trees. Nothing is recognizable in its old skin, yet everything shimmers. I am afraid, shrinking from the teeth of the cold water and from the howling trees. I perish at this point, down among dogs and upward beside lion. The pieces of me are carried fast away by plot and rhyme. See Artemis bathing. The moonlight on her body is the mother of God. It makes perfect sense. I am eaten and fed changeless into her breast, blood violet, alive. I remain your friend. Thank you. Yes, Al.
Okay, question. Anything unclear that you want to explain?
Sure, yes. There are points in the poem you just read where it seems much more clear, much more precise. And that movement between the two is striking. How do you feel that out during the composition?
It happens. I mean, there are signs and there are symbols. Not all signs become symbols, but you understand that that's a sign. You know, so like, this is very important. This commands my attention. I cannot say why, and I cannot say what it means, but I must pay attention. And from time to time, that sign becomes symbolic. You know, I think this is what drove Jesus nuts about his thick-headed disciples. I mean, how he could have found 12 more Bacchus people, I don't know how he could have done it. See, all right? What does it mean? Can you explain? You know, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Okay? You know, but I think, for me, that's how most poetry works. There are signs, it's an image. But sometimes a sign can be a sound. And sometimes those signs acquire a value we can say, we can talk about. But not always. But that doesn't have anything to do with the power and the truth of the signs. And I think most of my poems and most of the poems I like are kind of a wandering between signs and symbols. You know, the signs are always signs, but only sometimes symbols. So, and therefore I can only give a partial account of what has just happened in the making of the poem. But that's how I live. I think that's how we live. We walk around in the day, encountering many things that are meaningful, but most of which we do not know the meaning of. You know, and one has to be at peace with that, and live there. And to me, I mean, I've been doing this so long now, I really can't tell the difference between writing a poem and being alive. I tell my students that almost all the poems they like were written by someone who was alive at the time, and they should really try to consider that as a fundamental fact, which is to say, you know, not all signs become symbols, but yet we cannot take our eyes off them. Is that any useful?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
I'll have a follow-up later.
Okay.
To that one, but that's good. Okay, more. Yeah.
So you spoke about Shakespeare, reference Greek myth. Could you talk a little more about your influences and what you read?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, oh, sure, of course. I'm at the point where I've read just about everything, so I'm reading it again. And I have to say, and maybe it sounds corny, I've been influenced by almost everything that I've read. But particularly things like Shakespeare, because I think Shakespeare and Dante and maybe a few of the other really hot poets are able to see the human situation whole without reducing it to make it visible to themselves. Shakespeare always makes the world bigger. Okay? Dante always makes the world bigger. And I tend to be most influenced because I most envy poets who, by writing about a subject, show it to be bigger than I thought it was. And that can be done in a sonnet, or it can be done in one of Shakespeare's plays. But I love that experience in poetry. Because the first book of poems I ever got was an accident. My mother asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I wanted Bob Dylan's novel Tarantula. Now, my mother was very nervous about going to bookstores, but she was very brave, and she went to this bookstore and mumbled Dylan. And they gave her a book, which she gave me for Christmas, which was the collected poems of Dylan Thomas. Now, I loved my mother, so I didn't say, "Mom, ruined Christmas." So I took the book to my room and started reading it. I said, "Holy jeepers. You know, I don't understand a word of this, but it's great." Suddenly I feel like my skin has more things on it than I was aware of. And again, it's that sense of the great American philosopher William James talked about having vast stations It's funny how we use negative words much more than positive, so we all know what devastation means. When was the last time you used the word vastation? The sense of he was in the Adirondack Mountains and suddenly he realized that the world could not be contained by any idea of it. And that upsets some people. But it delights others. Like Shakespeare. Like Dylan Thomas. Like all the poets that William Blake. Emily Dickinson. Just... And I find that reassuring. I've always wanted to be the smallest, dumbest guy in the room. And fill the room with people that are bigger and smarter. And happily, that's not hard. When you got people like Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson floating around. But I can't say that it was this kind of writing or that nationality or that era, but it's always been the same effect. The sense of enlarging without explaining. It's like when you fall in love, you meet someone who cannot be contained by your idea of what a human being is. You say, and that person becomes inexhaustible to you, with any luck. Is that an answer? Okay.
Yeah, so sort of following up on that point, who, in terms of contemporary poets,
Mm-hmm.
who do you look to? Like, who do you...
None. John Ashbery died. That was it. No, I really don't. When I read contemporary poems, I expect to be paid. And that's not a condescension or any comment on the quality of work being done right now. It's just that it's beyond me. It's I'm at the end of my road. And other people are doing other things. And for me, John Ashbery was like the light that led me out. And I felt contemporaneity was a viable discourse as long as John Ashbery and a couple of others, Yves Bonfoy, Geoffrey Hill, were alive. But now I find it perplexing. I help my students as much as I can. I edit a book series at the University of Colorado Press. I'm poetry editor of the Colorado Review. So I publish the stuff, and I try to publish stuff that I feel is very meritorious, but it doesn't reach me. It doesn't reach me. And that's only about me, not about it. It's calling from someplace else than I'm calling from. But I think that's a good thing. I think we put too much emphasis on the contemporary in our own writing. I don't think it's good for a young writer to read her or his own contemporaries. I think it's best to go safely back, okay? Because you've got to figure it out. This mess. So it's okay to read Shakespeare because he had a different mess to figure out. But just beware of your contemporaries. Pay no attention. Ignore that man behind the curtain. I am the great and powerful Oz. It's dangerous. It really is. And be mindful. And again, I was truly devastated because I used to really look forward to John Ashbery's next book because I thought it would, that was lead kindly light, and there's not going to be a next one. And I'm tired now. And I miss him desperately. And I hope you all have some such figure or 2 or 10 in mind that are just older than you enough to not be your contemporary, but make the present seem habitable. Because I got to tell you the God's honest truth, the present right now doesn't seem habitable to me. I can't watch the news without wanting to die. I can't. It's very hard. Too scary. So I wasn't trying to be flippant at all. I was just trying to be honest, which is usually a mistake. Yeah.
Kind of at the time, I was again reading one of your interviews, and you had mentioned that the modernist writers, at least some of them, were ungenerous writers because they were writing against time, as opposed to writing with time. And so I'm assuming that when you're writing, in some sense, you are trying to write with time. How does that take place for you when you're actually writing?
Well, I think a lot of what you see in the modernist writers is a sort of a contest between spatial and temporal metaphor. Like I will talk about history if I can put a fence around it. I will talk about religion if I can explain it. I mean that somehow the imagination makes containers, okay, or that symbols somehow contain, and that's what I found by ungenerous in the literal meaning of the word, not generating anything, but containing something. And you could see that the modernist experience in history would frighten the jeepers out of you, and you'd want to control it. So I'm not saying it's a fault in their character. I adore the moderns. But you have to make friends with time and death to say something that will actually be helpful to someone else. Okay? And that means temporal metaphors. Let the things just pour through. I think I use that verb a lot in my writing. Pouring through. Just let it rush through, Sort of like when Rimbaud writes that poem, After the Flood. Yes, listen. I remember I was in a terrible flood of the Susquehanna River back in 1972. Hurricane Agnes came through. And there's something liberating about seeing a cow upside down in the top of a tree. Now, I know it's not liberating for the cow, obviously, but it says, okay, who's to say this isn't beautiful, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, the ultimate purpose of poetry is to manage for a couple of minutes not to be afraid. Because it's hard not to be afraid. But one of the wonderful things about reading poetry, and for me writing it, is that sometimes I manage not to be frightened by change and the lapse of time and the absolute certainty of death. And that I get some good effects out of it sometimes, Is that an answer? Is that? Okay. But I wasn't putting them down because, they had every reason, at all. But I just couldn't stay there. I couldn't rest in the wasteland and say, yep, that's got it. That's for me. No, I couldn't live there.
More. I asked my grandson.
Yeah.
I'm curious about in one of the poems you used the color green a lot, and imagery and colors are really big for me. So I was just wondering why green? Green, I feel like a lot of people define that as envy, if you're putting emotions with colors. So I was just wondering
Well, my mother's eyes were green, and that's very important to me. And I don't know, have you ever experienced this effect? It's very real. It's really easy to do it, say, in Nebraska. You need a really flat place that's flat for a long time. Okay? And you're looking out across the dark earth way towards the distant horizon. And if you look carefully, there's a very narrow line right above the horizon. It's green. And that's where I want to go. I think of it as the place that the trees are before they're trees. And I still see it in the color of my mother's eyes when I remember them. So for me, green is... H.D. Thoreau said, methinks my soul must be an invisible green. And so that's what it means to me. The green is the soul. It was the first sacred thing I saw in this world was my mother's eyes. So that's my green. If that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. You're that mom?
Yeah, I got a question. You have grown out of this tradition, a tradition of faith, but also related to that faith, I would loosely call it kind of an extension of Romanticism and Surrealism. And I think that at the time, like Revell's writing, we see the devastating effects of a kind of rationality. Right? But I see in your work, a lot of beautiful rebellious energy that is taking on the devastating potential of rationality. But in terms of whether you're reading the poets of your time or you're just reading your time, I'm wondering if the status of rationality has changed somewhat, certainly since Bertolt's time.
Mm-hmm.
Where now we see the devastating effects of the absence of rationality, right, and the discrediting of science and so forth. And so I'm wondering, what is your attitude toward that? And when Ben asked his question, I wasn't thinking about signs versus symbols. I was thinking, in some sense, about the familiar versus the unfamiliar, or where we get, like you'll have lines like, I live in a house, and I know that has a larger significance as we move forward, but part of what's wonderfully weird about it is how plain it is. Yeah, you live in that, and we got you in that house. Mm-hmm. But when you say everything is flawless, we're going, well, we know that's not the whole story, right? It may be a perspective of the whole story. But you just said we live in a hell, so I know that's true too. So there, when there's that tension, we feel the power of the irrational, which is also power of faith, and a different perspective. You're inviting into your poem a different perspective. But I'm curious what you think about, does rationality hold any value for you in a poem?
Well, I mean, in the core meaning of the word ratio.
Right. Or right reason.
Right reason.
Talked about that.
Yeah, right reason.
With Milton.
Yeah. And the irrational things that I hold dear are reasonable. That there's a reason, and then an irrationality, and then there's the reason on the other side of irrationality. Okay, and what I find toxic, and what I think a lot of human art has found toxic, is that reason that lingers on this side of the threshold of the irrational, that won't have the adventure of the irrational so as to come out the other side. So the Dante's Divine Comedy is irrational until it isn't. And then, but he had to go through that. And I hate the kind of cowering rationality that leaves us bereft of plenitude, of all the wonderful evidence of things we cannot explain. And so for me, it's like the old Donovan song. First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. First there's reason, then there is no reason, then there is. And for me, right reason includes irrational experience.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I get that.
And actually thrives on it. It's the soil in which real reason grows.
Yeah, but not all irrationality is equal.
Oh, no. Well, some irrationality has no purpose. It's gratuitous irrationality, and that's another kind of sloth. The bad surrealist poem. The difference, I think, between Dali and Magritte. Magritte is a great painter. Dali's a charlatan. And that's how I would explain that distinction. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
So you're a poet. You've been a poet for a really long time. You've also been.
Depends on who you ask, but go ahead.
Yeah. You've also been in academia for a really long time.
Even long, yeah.
Have you had periods where you're just like, I don't like poetry, I don't like academia? How do you get through those? I'm asking for a friend.
Well, tell your friends. I've never not liked poetry. I mean, ever since I got that accidental book, it's been my daily bread. I get tired of some poets. I get tired of some poetry. But I'm at the point now where I almost like everything. I mean, I've layly decided that Dryden is really cool. And I never thought I'd live that long. But Dryden is really cool. Academe, I'm disappointed with Academe right now. It's getting a little chicken. Okay? Universities have stopped being places of education and they've become places of marketing. The student is no longer a student in a lot of places, but a consumer. And that doesn't do the students any service at all. But Academe has periods of disgraceful behavior, and then it comes back. I have a real faith in the rising generation of PhDs, because I think they don't want to work in a kind of intellectual Walmart. They don't want to be customer satisfaction. I'm an education associate. Welcome. I'm the greeter at Harvard. No. So Academe I do get tired of, but that's why God gave us sabbaticals. So we just turn our back on those bozos for a year, and then I'm the first person in my family that finished high school, much less got a PhD or anything like that. So I still feel like an imposter in Academe. I feel if they really knew me, they wouldn't have made me a full professor, and But I've been chair of my English department, so I know who they are too. I know their filthy little secrets. And Academe is a hard place, but everywhere else is harder. Anything else you can do for a living is at least, given my incredibly limited skill set, much more difficult and much more onerous. So tell your friend to be of good cheer. Better days are coming. I really believe this, because the young scholars I know, I mean the ones that are just coming out of graduate school now, they want a chance to talk about important stuff and stand for it. They don't want to just sell something and make a buck. So tell your friend, finish his goddamn PhD and get a job. Okay. He'll be glad he did. No, I mean, I'll tell you another story. And then my knees are getting a little weak. When I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, I went to a party with a poet that at that time I really loved, because he was a lovable man named Richard Hugo. Wonderful poet from Montana. Generous spirit. Sorely missed. And I was really agonizing about whether to get a PhD or just leave for Europe and be a poet. And so I went to him and I remember sitting at the kitchen table with him, and I said, I write poems. And I'm thinking about going to graduate school, but I'm afraid, will I still be a poet if I go to graduate school? And he looked at me and he said, Don, people write poems in prison. You can write poems in graduate school. And it really helped me, as simple as that utterance was. It helped me. So, don't lose heart or patience with Academe, I would tell your friend. Because let's face it, where are they going to be reading poems in the next 50 years or so? Most academics can't read a poem if you put a gun to their head, but some of them can. And that's good enough. That's good enough.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.